Hello and welcome to the opening ceremony of the 2021 FIGI Symposium. Thank you all so much for being with us today and over the coming weeks. My name is LJ Rich, BBC technology presenter and AI music artist, and it is an honour to be the master of ceremony for this occasion. The Financial Inclusion Global Initiative, or FIGI, is a partnership between the World Bank Group, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure of the Bank of International Settlements, and the International Telecommunication Union, or the ITU, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to support and accelerate the implementation of country-led reform actions to meet national financial inclusion targets and ultimately the global universal financial access goal. FIGI funds national implementations in 3 countries, China, Egypt and Mexico, supports working groups to tackle 3 sets of outstanding challenges for reaching universal financial access. 1. Electronic payment acceptance. 2. Digital ID for financial services. And 3. Security, infrastructure and trust. To date, FIGI has held 2 symposia. The first FIGI Symposium took place in Bangalore, India in 2017, and the second FIGI Symposium took place in 2019 in Cairo, Egypt. This is the 3rd and final edition of the FIGI Symposium. It provides a forum for dialogue amongst telecom and financial sector authorities, financial service providers, digital financial services, or DFS, digital financial services providers, DFS, and related stakeholders to share experiences and perspectives on scaling up DFS. We'll begin with the welcome address. For this, I have the honour to introduce ITU's Director of TSB, Dr. Chesab Lee.
Thank you very much, LJ. Someone maybe control my video, I guess. Okay, thank you very much, LJ. Distinguished colleagues and friends, very good day to you all. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this 3rd and final FIGI Symposium. So I hope you and your families are all in good health and good spirits. COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the critical importance of our digital infrastructure and the need to continue investing in our digital future. So we must advance together. Everyone in everywhere must share the benefits of digital transformation. So in creating access to digital financial services, we should work to ensure that these services speak meaningfully to people's needs. This is a matter of enabling meaningful participation in our societies and economies. The pandemic has also made clear that cybersecurity, trust, and access to reliable information are nothing less than matters of public safety. So it has highlighted the importance of the ambitions that drive the Financial Inclusion Global Initiative, FIGI. So FIGI supports national policy reforms to stimulate financial inclusion, working with China, Egypt, and Mexico, as LG indicated, to provide valuable case studies for other countries worldwide. So in FIGI's 3 working groups, we have worked to provide a basis for digital ID systems to grant citizens access to formal systems of all kinds. We have studied how we could create an incentive for electronic payment to become the norm for very low value transactions. So, and we have addressed security and consumer trust to enhance users' confidence that money and digital identities are safe. So FIGI Symposia showcase national experiences in promoting financial inclusion and share the latest findings of FIGI's working groups. This year's FIGI Symposium follows 2017 and 2019 FIGI Symposia in Bangalore and Cairo. At this final symposium, we will gain a unique insight into the achievements and ambitions of the FIGI community, and we will also welcome your views on financial inclusion priorities beyond 2021. So we have an excellent program ahead of us, spanning topics from fintech for inclusion and gender equality to experiences reaching undeserved and vulnerable populations during the pandemic. So, and we will approach our discussions from every possible perspective. Diversity is the defining feature of the FIGI community. So this initiative brings together all actors working in the interest of financial inclusion. It brings together an enormous wealth of expertise. This FIGI Symposium is a meeting of the telecom and the financial services sectors and the many new market segments emerging at their intersection. FIGI is also privileged to enjoy the support of the developing countries that have pioneered the use of digital channels to extend the reach of the financial system. Just 10 years ago, universal access to financial services seemed a very distant prospect. We have come an extremely long way from that, and financial inclusion is now well within reach. So, and for my ability to say that, I must thank the community joining us online today. FIGI is an example of the cohesive model of behavior that will be essential to our achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This inclusive, partnership-oriented initiative has helped to clarify the contributions expected of all stakeholders in digital finance, including the contribution expected of ITU. So ITU standards provide for high quality of service and user experience, and they safeguard security to build trust in digital finance. So we also host FIGI's new DFS Security Lab to support regulators and industry in building on firm technical foundations. FIGI has been instrumental in identifying and refining the demand for this ITU action. So I'd like to thank all contributors to FIGI for the outstanding collaboration that characterizes this initiative. So we can all be proud to be part of this important work. So I would also like to express ITU's gratitude to our FIGI partners, the World Bank and the World Bank Group, and the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures, and of course the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for its generous support of the FIGI partnership. This is our final FIGI Symposium, but we have created a culture of collaboration that will sustain for many years to come. So FIGI's reason for being can be described very succinctly. An estimated 1.7 billion adults have never had a bank account, but 1.1 billion of them have a mobile phone. So digital technologies are the unifying force at the center of our interconnected world. So the questions posed by COVID-19 are asking us how plan to live together harmoniously, both in times of crisis and in times of prosperity. So I look forward to our continued work together to ensure that our many interconnections help us to care for each other better and build a better future for all. Thank you very much. All the best for this symposium.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chaesub Lee, Director of TSB from the ITU. Now it's time for our second welcome address, and I would like to introduce the Director of Financial Services for the Poor from the Gates Foundation, Michael Wigand.
Thank you, LJ. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world. Thank you to the ITU for virtually hosting the event today, to the World Bank, ITU, and CPMI for your partnership in this endeavor. and to Her Majesty Queen Maxima for her forthcoming remarks. Thanks too to the in-country and global teams who worked so diligently over the course of this initiative, and to the participants logged on today and across the globe. When we first came together with our partners 4 years ago to launch the Financial Inclusion Global Initiative, we set out to catalyze momentum towards universal financial access. We sought to do so by building on the deep and long-standing work of our 3 global partners: the World Bank Group for its vision of a world without poverty, the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, for its commitment to connecting the world's people for more than 150 years, and CPMI, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure at the Bank of International Settlements, for its commitment to central bank cooperation to promote financial and economic stability by providing safe and efficient payment systems. The FIGI project continued the public engagement and momentum of 3 important work streams: CPMI and World Bank payment aspects of financial inclusion, or PAFI principles, the ITU's focus group on digital financial services, and the Gates Foundation's Level 1 project to make real-time payments accessible to low-income consumers and merchants. FIGI sought to accelerate the development of the DFS ecosystem by supporting policymakers and pilots in 3 countries and through 3 global work streams on digital identity, electronic payment acceptance, and DFS security, infrastructure, and trust. As the world becomes more and more digital, collaboration has become only more critical for policymakers from all sectors to enable inclusive environments and infrastructures. FIGI set out to do this important work in a new way by forging new types of global partnerships. At its core, FIGI's implementing partners represent both financial and ICT sectors. They represent implementing teams, researchers, and standard setters. The initiative's structure and work brought more attention and practical applications of cross-sector alignment. FIGI placed cross-sector teams in 3 countries and across 3 topical working groups to harmonize agendas and fill knowledge gaps to strengthen outcomes for the world's most excluded. FIGI demonstrated how cross-sector teams, trainings, and convenings can work, not only to align financial inclusion goals, but to harmonize tactics and strategies to deliver on these goals. We could not have predicted that COVID-19 would strike during FIGI's final year of work. We're grateful for the resilience of our in-country counterparts and global partners and their ability to quickly pivot the ways that we worked and to keep the work going. FIGI teams were well placed to quickly adjust priorities to meet the most pressing needs of countries in the face of crisis and recovery. Today, we together face new urgency around work we have been pursuing for years. As governments seek to contain the health impacts of the COVID-19 outbreak, they're confronting another daunting challenge: how to limit the economic hardships caused by the pandemic. As we work to rebuild economies and recover from the hardships of the pandemic, the relevance of the FIGI topics, pilots, and policymaking support has never been so clear. We see a renewed imperative for digital IDs to enable the distribution of social recovery benefits and transfers. Inclusive digital ID systems ensure that everyone can meet the ID requirements to open and use financial accounts and to fully participate in a modern economy. We observe a starker understanding of the ways that real-time interoperable payment systems, which enable individuals, businesses, and governments to easily transact with one another, can facilitate life-saving transfers and pave the way for more resilient economies. And we see an increasing need to design financial systems that work for women. The failure of closing the gender gap in financial inclusion is a notable gap in our work. And this has been exacerbated by COVID-19's disproportionately negative impact on women's livelihoods and welfare. We must make financial systems work for women. Looking forward, building a more crisis-resilient economy will require an enormous increase in the capacity of countries to know the identities of their systems, of the identities of their citizens, and pay them reliably, transparently, and without leakage. As governments advance their post-COVID rebuilding efforts, We have the opportunity to leverage digital financial technologies to build back more inclusive, secure, and resilient economies. FIGI offers relevant lessons learned that we can draw on as we build back these infrastructures and policies. Although this virtual event marks the closing of the initiative, we know that the urgency of the work continues. We hope that the lessons and practical ideas shared over the coming weeks of this virtual symposium can inform your work as we continue to face the call to enable our global citizenry to participate fully in digitizing economies. I wish you well for this virtual symposium and look forward to the discussion. And now it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our keynote address by Her Majesty Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, the United Nations Secretary General's Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, or the UN SGSA, who will be joining us today via a pre-recorded video message. Thank you.
Thank you to Michael Wigand from the Gates Foundation. Queen Maxima has served as the UN Secretary General's Special Advocate since 2009. In this role, she is a leading global voice on advancing universal access to and responsible usage of affordable, effective and safe financial services. The UN SGSA raises awareness, serves as a convener, encourages leaders and supports actions to expand financial inclusion at a global and country level, all in close collaboration with partners from the public and private sector.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to join you virtually for the third and possibly last symposium of Financial Inclusion Global Initiative. We have been close partners of the ITU, CPMI and the World Bank for a very long time. And it is my pleasure to congratulate you on the progress that this platform has created over the last 3 years. This gathering of the FIGI community also gives us the opportunity to examine experiences of the last year, to share lessons learned and to look ahead. Given the large economic impact of COVID-19, it is no surprise that this is high on the agenda. The pandemic has created the deepest global recession in 8 decades. Up to 163 million more people around the world could potentially be pushed into extreme poverty by the end of the year, reversing the global community's poverty alleviation progress. Notably, it is a very challenging time for the poor and marginalized, especially for people who had limited or no access to financial services prior to the pandemic. Workers in the informal sector have suffered significantly. They're often not covered by social insurance and are not easily registered for relevant government SME assistance programs. Women have also been disproportionately affected. They are twice as likely as men to lose their jobs. Economies globally have faced the challenge of supporting as many as 3.7 billion individuals and 500 million micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. With the huge scale and urgency that government disbursements have assumed during the COVID-19 crisis, it is high on government's priorities to put in place key digital public goods which can enable efficient and targeted emergency payments. Over 200 nations have expanded social protection measures, many using foundational ID systems and digital payments to provide transfers directly into bank accounts or mobile wallets. For example, India has leveraged its national ID system Aadhaar and its advanced interoperable payment infrastructure to rapidly sending $7 per month to over 200 million vulnerable women. They have also provided emergency government-backed loans for millions of MSMEs that are collateral-free. These type of programs have created important entry points to the formal financial system by establishing new account holders and giving them access to digital financial services that support recovery efforts. Scheme design and innovation are very important to ensure that account access translates into usage and that really benefits them. As is taking a gender lens to ensure that programs benefit all and do not unintentionally exclude women. Critically, the crisis has created an appetite in many countries to invest in key digital public goods. These can provide the infrastructure rails and regulatory environment to reach users and to build financial services which can improve their financial lives. Some of these are critical for access, such as connectivity, physical infrastructure, and digital IDs. Others make markets work better for customers, such as fair competition and interoperable payment systems. And still others protect the financial system and users, such as data privacy, cybersecurity, consumer protection, and digital and financial literacy. One important takeaway is that we need to share knowledge among different countries on how to carefully roll out digital public goods, how to boost coverage, and how to strengthen existing capabilities. This is where platforms such as FIGI can be of importance. We can learn from Pakistan, which has established an interoperable payment system, or from Peru with its digital ID system. Yet, as countries strive to make progress, we will need to think about digital public goods outside of silos. We can start by recognizing that a whole-of-government approach helps to ensure that all involved ministries and agencies share the same vision and commitment. Seeking technical assistance in designing, sequencing, and coordinating approaches from partners at a very early stage is really key. My partners are ready to facilitate knowledge sharing among policymakers and beyond. Finally, it is important to recognize that having access to financial services does not mean that customers will automatically have better outcomes in their lives. Financial inclusion is not an end in itself. It is a tool to create jobs, improve nutrition, increase access to health and education, and empower especially women. That means much more attention is needed in designing, innovating, and championing services that really help them achieve these goals. Policymakers have a key role in putting in place the enabling environment and monitoring outcomes beyond just access and usage. And private sector innovators will be critical in designing, experimenting, and delivering services that improve the financial lives of their customers. In closing, I look forward to following your country's continued progress and cheering your accomplishments. Together with my partners, we are ready to continue to provide support. I wish you much success in all your efforts and fully expect that your work will help build a more inclusive digital financial system with expanded opportunities for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Her Majesty Queen Maxima for providing our opening keynote video. Closed captioning is available if participants wish to turn it on. You'll see a button marked live transcript at the bottom right of the Zoom screen. If you switch it on, you'll see my words coming out as if at exactly the same time that I'm saying them. It's amazing. At this point, I'd now like to introduce an address from the Global Director Finance in the Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation, that's FCI, Global Practice at World Bank, Jean Pem.
Can you hear me? Sorry, my video is not working, so hopefully the technician...
Don't worry, we've got time to fix it, and I'm pretty confident in saying virtually every single person on this call has experienced difficulty with turning sound and camera on and having their machines obey them. So don't worry.
Hopefully that works now.
Yes, it looks like we can see and hear you. Okay, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's really a pleasure to join you for opening this FIGI Symposium. In a very inspiring address, Her Majesty Queen Maxima referred to financial inclusion as a tool to create jobs and empower women. We could not agree more. Financial inclusion represents a critical enabler for ending extreme poverty and building shared prosperity. It provides access to a range of financial services that can help meet the needs of the world's poor. By 2017, the year FIGI was established, significant progress had been made in advancing access to basic transaction accounts, including many developments within digital finance and fintech. This reflected the efforts of many countries working to enable digital financial services. Still, Large pockets of financial exclusion persisted. 1.7 billion adults worldwide lacked access to basic transaction account in 2017. Women, youth, and the poor made up and continue to make up a disproportionately large share of the unbanked. The underlying gender gap in mobile ownership remains a challenge. Within this context, FIGI was established to synchronize efforts between the financial and ICT sectors to improve financial inclusion worldwide and scale up digital financial services. Digital infrastructure is critical for the functioning of financial infrastructure and the provision of DFS. By design, FIGI was implemented as a partnership between the World Bank, the International Telecommunication Union, and the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure, supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Its goal is to coordinate efforts and encourage policymakers and stakeholders across the ICT and financial sector to collaborate and commit together towards enhancing financial inclusion. Since 1999, the number of people living in extreme poverty worldwide fell by more than 1 billion. But part of this is unfortunately said to be reversed due to the COVID pandemic. The World Bank estimates that between 119 and 124 million people have fallen back into poverty in 2020. This is projected to rise to between 143 and 163 million people in 2021. Women also face higher job losses and greater responsibility for care. For example, employment losses for women stand at 5% as compared to 3.9% for men. Female-owned businesses were roughly 6 percentage points more likely to have closed their businesses as compared to male-owned ones. Lessons from Ebola also show that quarantine significantly reduced women's economic and livelihood activities. The impacts of COVID-19 may therefore result in a prolonged dip in women's income and labor force participation, with compounding impacts for women already living in poverty. Since 2017, FIGI Partners work together through working groups, technical assistance programs to develop and share new principles, tools, and recommendations for both financial and ICT policymakers and industry leaders worldwide to strengthen core DFS enablers. For example, FIGI Partners work with policymakers to strengthen national payment and ICT system and develop a more robust enabling environment for DFS. In Mexico, for instance, as an emergency response to COVID, FIGI supported policymakers to develop new regulations on digital ID. This aimed to quickly include more vulnerable customers in the formal financial system. In Egypt, FIGI supported policymakers to issue new consumer protection regulation, establish a financial consumer protection supervision unit, and start implementing a financial ombudsman scheme. This is of particular importance as the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated not only the importance of digitizing financial services, but also how risk to consumers can increase in times of crisis and economic stress. Global guidance and tools have also been shared with policymakers to support reforms to enhance electronic payment acceptance, digital ID, cybersecurity, and secure infrastructures. For example, FIGI contributed to new guidance on cyber resilience for financial market infrastructure and digital ID. Now let's look forward. We would like to reiterate Her Majesty Queen Maxima's message around the importance for policymakers to champion financial inclusion and collaborate together across the ICT and financial sectors to strengthen digital financial services enablers. This will help build a robust and resilient financial sector in a post-COVID world. As FIGI journey unfortunately comes to an end, this 6-week FIGI Symposium intends to share knowledge from different countries. It will offer tools and guidance to strengthen capabilities of policymakers and industry leaders to roll out DFS and advance financial inclusion. It is really important for policymakers to continue committing to reaching vulnerable groups, especially women, to ensure that they are not left behind. Digital financial services and infrastructure play a big role in efforts to close the gender gap. Gender parity will be a running theme for the symposium, with a focus on how authorities can strengthen women's access to finance and ensure gender equity in leadership and representation across the financial sector. On behalf of the World Bank, I want to thank all the FIGI partners and policymakers, stakeholders worldwide who have participated in the FIGI program and FIGI Symposia. FIGI has had an insightful and impactful journey. We hope the knowledge shared and lessons learned during this symposium will help policymakers drive the future of financial inclusion forward. I wish you a very fruitful symposium. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Jean-Pam, for setting the scene as we now invite our panelists to join our fireside chat on the different aspects of FIGI and some of its achievements so far. We're also going to be looking at key lessons learned, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how the findings of FIGI will be discussed during the symposium. So panelists, if you haven't already done so, please turn on your cameras and sound as we start our question and answer session. And as ever, you are welcome to add subsequent thoughts to another person's answer. So we're going to start with a question to each of you in turn. Mahesh, you're going to be up first. Do you think FIGI has been effective in this sense?
Thanks very much, LJ, and thanks very much to everyone joining today. The short answer is yes, but I think to answer the question more effectively, we have to think back to some of the ideas around which FIGI was generated, right? I think there was a recognition that achieving financial inclusion really requires policymakers and financial service providers from across the financial and the ICT sectors to come together to complement efforts going on, including under the Universal Financial Access 2020 agenda, to scale up digital financial services. So we recognize that ICT networks and broad coverage and reliable power make basic mobile telephony services accessible and kind of underpin the DFS services that can be provided in, particularly in remote locations. And we see this in the form of mobile money, whether it's in Kenya with M-Pesa, or Bangladesh with bKash and the like. And that access to data services, particularly 3G and above, improves user experiences and enables app-based delivery of DFS services. And again, we see that, with Paytm in India, with WeChat and Alipay in China. And so there was a recognition that FIGI needed to be a collaborative partnership between these sectors, and therefore a collaboration between, us at the World Bank, the ITU, the CPMI, all of course with the fantastic support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to coordinate efforts and encourage policymakers and stakeholders across the ICT and financial sectors to collaborate and commit towards enhancing financial inclusion. And with that in mind, I certainly think it's been effective because it galvanized the work of all of the partners to deliver solutions and apply, tools and recommendations to expand digital financial services and inclusion across these sectors. So we'll hear more of that throughout the symposium, but we developed guidance around electronic payments, assessments, incentives, innovations. So these tools have been piloted in non-FIGI countries as well, such as Pakistan and Morocco and Tunisia. We've developed new guidance on cyber resilience for authorities to assess and enhance the cyber resilience of their financial market infrastructures, which is really critical to financial stability and financial inclusion. And in particular, we're going to hear, I think, a dedicated session jointly hosted by the World Bank and the IMF on the role of central banks in enhancing cyber resilience in the financial sector. And that will highlight some of the emerging approaches that have been developed out of FIGI. We've also developed global digital ID guidance, including contributions towards the G20 digital identity onboarding policy guidance and the FATF released guidance on digital ID that has really been meaningful in helping authorities developing measures to account for onboarding, particularly under COVID-19. And the ITU has developed an array of tools to improve the security and infrastructure and trust of the ITC sector for financial inclusion. So I think all of this has been a big part of what I would count as FIGI initiatives. But then, of course, the most important thing is to look at what's happening on the ground in countries. And I think FIGI helped bring together the financial and ICT sectors more holistically and encourage a collaboration towards financial inclusion policymaking that has really helped scale up DFS. So in Mexico, for example, the authorities launched a new financial inclusion policy in March 2020, which brought together recommendations across multiple sectors to advance financial inclusion issues around digital ID and digital payments for rural consumers in particular. And we also supported governments to strengthen financial and digital infrastructure to drive a transition towards DFS and provide faster, more convenient, and easier to use payment services. So again, in Mexico, faster retail payment services based on open public infrastructure like the Mexico CODI infrastructure that can facilitate really low or almost zero cost digital payments between individuals and governments. And I think more countries have been working responsibly to include the last miles, if you will, of underserved adults while also mitigating the risks by building robust consumer protection regimes. And I'm really proud of the way the FIGI initiative has supported this. The Central Bank of Egypt and its Financial Regulatory Authority, for example, issued new consumer protection regulations in 2019, which help build consumer confidence and trust in the financial sector. And I think that's a really critical part of enhancing and promoting digital financial services, is to make sure that consumers are not only protected, but that they trust the system. At the same time, I think bringing together the financial and ICT sectors is not without its challenges. And so some aspects of digital finance can fall between the regulatory perimeters of institutions, and a result, there can be some competition, political sensitivity issues, or ambiguity around competing mandates. And I think that's one of the lessons learned. But overall, I think it's been a tremendously successful initiative.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to come in on that before I go to the next question?
Would be happy to. I think Jamie might as well.
Go ahead, Bilal.
Okay. Thank you, LJ, and thanks, Mahesh, for the excellent overview of the impact and the effectiveness of FIGI. Just wanted to add a couple of points. One is the output of the working groups that you mentioned. We have 17 reports that were published by FIGI, I think totaling over 800 pages in various areas that you mentioned from the various working groups. And these are really excellent tools for countries around the world that are embarking on financial inclusion or that are accelerating financial inclusion, especially because of COVID-19. So these are effective tools for both telecom and financial regulators and implementers on the various topics that Mahesh covered. Another point I would add is that some of the work of FIGI has led ITU to adopt a resolution at its plenipotentiary conference in 2018 in Dubai by all 193 member states on financial inclusion, and especially on the importance of including women and vulnerable communities in the financial system. So it brought the topic to the highest level of decision makers at the ITU by all of our member states. And for me, that's a very important impact. Perhaps the third point is that our study groups that develop standards in ITUT have published a number of ITUT recommendations or international standards in the area of security, identity management, and the quality of service and experience. And that's a direct impact and relationship to the output from the working groups under FIGI. Finally, to make it a concrete offer to our member states so that they can use the security mechanisms, we have a DFS security lab here in the ITU headquarters in Geneva, where many member states are coming forward to try to audit their security features for the digital financial services. So certainly to your question, LJ, has it been effective? Yes, for many of the reasons that Mahesh and I covered at this moment. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to go on to the second question, which actually, Bilal, is going to be back to you for. So I hope that you've got some breath left for this. FIGI has made many strides trying to bolster policymaker efforts around core DFS enablers and new innovations. So, Bilal, do tell us some of the core lessons learned.
Thank you, LJ. Maybe 3 points as well here. The first one is that when we talk about the digital transformation in the financial sector, it's about a convergence of the digital or ICT expertise and the financial services expertise. And one of the key lessons is that the regulatory bodies on the telecom side and the financial services side must work hand in hand and have that direct dialogue in order to provide an enabling environment in the countries so that fintech, security, consumer protection, and gender aspects of financial inclusion could be addressed holistically by both primary regulatory bodies and enabling bodies in the various countries. Security is not just an issue. The second point is that security is not just an issue for the digital financial service providers. Cooperation at the national and international level is necessary. There is a need for cooperation at the national level with multiple stakeholders from the ICT and financial services sector that are active in the field of cybersecurity, sharing information about threats and incidents, conducting regular audits of DFS application infrastructure, ensuring that service providers have appropriately skilled human resources to deal with cybersecurity threats, and collaboration at the international level with counterparts in cybersecurity in the areas of risk management, adoption of international standards, and compliance with international guidelines and principles are a necessity. Perhaps the third point is that through the DFS Security Lab and the output of the Security Infrastructure and Trust Working Group, the ITU is aiming to provide a structured approach for digital financial service regulators and providers in emerging economies to tackle the security risk in digital finance and to work in a collaborative manner to address the cyber preparedness of the DFS sector and mitigate the impact of vulnerabilities in the ecosystem.
Thank you very much. Jamie, this next question is for you. Could you tell us, please, what have been the implications of FIGI's work on the more vulnerable segments, and women? Are they more fully included as a result of DFS, or are they being left behind, for instance, due to the digital divide?
Thanks, LJ. And such a good and important question, as we've heard from all of our opening speakers. And the answer is complex. I think, yes, it's a yes and response to that question, perhaps more included and at risk of being more left behind at the same time. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So I think much of the work that FIGI has done to create enabling environments, coherent standards, safe payment ecosystems is contributing to ecosystems of digital financial services that is conducive to participation by all. It is opening up more opportunities for the vulnerable segments and for women to be more included. For sure, the working groups that have been mentioned and the tools being developed and the work in the countries have been advancing some really critical needs for these vulnerable segments, including women, like accessibility, trustability, eligibility to get into the financial system. And I'll give just a few examples of what I mean by that when I say that.
Yeah.
So, looking at the PAFI and L1P principles that we have been advancing through this project, and there are some critical aspects of that are actually super crucial for reaching women. Issues of interoperability, reducing the costs of transactions and services, increasing transparency, getting know your customer rules and regulations right for the most vulnerable or excluded segments, and really advancing payments acceptance so that payments can reach where women and more excluded groups are. On the consumer protection side, it's been very critical getting those regulations right, getting dispute resolution mechanisms right for those who are new to the system, who maybe have not always been treated fairly by the system. The DFS competency frameworks that the SIT working group have pulled together have been really critical for this and have taken a really crucial gender lens. The ID work that Mahesh and others have mentioned in Mexico, the work in Egypt and Mexico to support government-to-person payment systems, which largely are targeted to mothers and often women, that has been really critical too. I mean, honestly, I can't think of anything that FIGI has been working to advance in any of the areas that don't have critical implications for women and for vulnerable groups. And yet, do I think it has been enough? No, I don't. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. too. I mean, we've heard this from the opening remarks, and I think critical to just keep hammering these data points home. Women and vulnerable segments are historically and currently at a huge disadvantage for financial systems. And we've talked about the 9 percentage point gap, gender gap in financial services. That's a global average. You start slicing and dicing that by developing country, women who are rural, women who are low income, women who are low income and rural, and those gaps get wider and wider and wider, meaning that more is going to need to be done to ensure that we're bringing them in. And so, we talked about the 1.7 billion unbanked, 1.1 billion of those 1.7 are women. 50% of women, that's 1 in 2 in lower income countries, do not have that foundational account that we've said is so critical for onboarding into digital financial services. There's also gaps in ICT access, mobile internet, mobile phone access. All of those gaps are there, and they remain there. So when we have legal barriers and regulatory barriers, those are going to disproportionately affect those segments, and that remains true. And then, as we've heard over and over, COVID also hit, and we had a lot of outcomes from that no one could have anticipated. On the one hand, huge opportunities for onboarding and bringing in women in low-income segments. Rapid digitalization, G2P payments skyrocketed. As we heard from Queen Maxima, there was 1.1 billion new recipients within, I think it was something like 8 months of the crisis hitting for G2P payments. How many of those were going to women? We don't actually know, because we don't track gender disaggregated data at that level to know whether they were. In some cases, we're starting and we're making progress. And I know that the bank, World Bank Group in particular, is really working to advance that, but that's a critical issue and a gap. We had reduced fees. We had lots of the central banks were responding, and I think that doing a lot to bring people in. And at the same time, there were increased risks. I think we saw that, for instance, cybercrime and fraud and phishing attacks increased during COVID. And so you're bringing new populations into the system rapidly in a crisis environment, which can be an opportunity really for financial inclusion and onboarding. But if we're not looking at those critical risks, that those who are maybe less likely to have been interacting with the system or trusting the system in the first place, and then they're subjected to fraud or crime, that's a really serious issue, and something that we have to do, make sure that we are paying a lot of close attention to and addressing. So the point is, the financial systems are not equal. Historically, they were not created to be equal. They are still currently not equal. So, just like I can't think of any of FIGI's work that doesn't have implications for women, I also can't think of any of the things that we're trying to advance, any of the policies, tools, standards that we're pushing out there that women would experience, especially low-income women in developing countries, in the same way that men would experience. So we have to look at and address the barriers through a very intentional lens. I think we can't say, we're going to create a system that works for all and assume that it's also going to work for women and low income and vulnerable. We have to look at them in particular and what their needs are and how these types of tools and standards and regulations and policies will impact them, and try to bridge that gap. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of great work that's been done. You've heard it from others. I think we could have and should have done more. But like others have said, the work that FIGI has been advancing has become all the more urgent. And I think that we are seeing and acknowledging these challenges and doing more to address them. On a final note, I think that we've heard from Jean Pem and others that the policies and systems design that we are doing, that matters a lot for women's financial inclusion, but also so does representation. Representation and power matter a lot. And when we look at who is designing and implementing the systems themselves, a lot of times it's also men. And so gender intentionality is challenging if there are no women at the decision-making and policy-making table. So I've been really proud throughout the entire FIGI program, how intentionally the group has really been to ensure that every panel, every working group, every event has female representation and leadership. And I'm super excited about, I think there's a session on Thursday on increasing women leaders representation in digital finance. And so I encourage everyone to attend that. But I'm really, I think this is a critical, super urgent moment for us to be putting a spotlight on this. I've appreciated that every speaker to now has mentioned it, and just wanted to drill all of those points home.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mahesh, I understand you'd like to come in on this.
Yeah, thanks very much, LJ. I just want to pick up on Jamie's point about representation, which I think is really critical and often overlooked issue in addressing this challenge of women's economic inclusion, which is if we look at fintechs themselves, right, that are driving the design of products and helping us reach underserved groups, there's a huge funding gap for female-owned fintechs. I think in 2019, which is when we have the latest data for, companies with a female CEO represented only 11% of all venture capital deals in fintech, and only 7% of fintech deals had a woman in the actual CEO position. I mean, that's a shocking gap if you think about that. And then it's not surprising, of course, that we don't have products and services that are tailored for women. And I think if the comments of Jamie this morning and of Queen Maxima and Jean, others, I really think, I hope they sound the alarm on the crisis that we're really facing in women's access. And it's not like we don't know what some of the solutions are. I think that's one of the really important things to highlight, which is we know some of the things that work. You know, Jamie mentioned government-to-person payments. Even before the COVID pandemic, government-to-person payments have fueled something like 150 million women globally to get access to their first kind of transaction account. We know that digital ID and eKYC reforms to make onboarding reduce bottlenecks for women have, you know, fueled a huge reduction in the gender gap in India, for example. So we know the work that has to be done. We have to get on with doing this work, and we have to make gender intentionality mainstream across all of the work we do in you know, the ICT and financial sectors in order to address this, I think, this sort of the fundamental challenge in inclusion.
Brilliant, thank you.
If I could add to Jamie and Mahesh, LJ, I think Michael reminded us of the mission of ITU in his opening remarks. ITU committed to connecting the world, and today we see that roughly half the world is unconnected, and there are more women who are unconnected compared to men. So certainly one of the objectives of ITU and priorities to connect the world and connect women to the network, to the internet. To that, we have the ITU Equals program, which is a global partnership that works towards digital gender equality and working towards ensuring women and girls have access and skills to take part in and help shape the digital transformation. And we will hear more about this in one of the sessions of FIGI on the 20th of May, a special session on ITU Equals. I'd also like to mention that in one of the reports that was produced by FIGI on the DFS consumer competency framework, the issue of literacy, financial literacy, especially for women, is addressed. And there are a number of capacity building or skills building that could be tailored towards women to make sure they are connected, they are included in the financial sector, and they have the skills to do it properly. So certainly those are some of the elements that ITU is bringing to bear in this partnership to ensure that women are included financially.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, Thomas, thank you for your patience. We're going to come to you next and ask you, what has been the role of standards setting bodies and central banks in financial inclusion? Happy
to answer this question. If I may, I just want to add one point on the previous question. So I think indeed, technological innovation has made really major inroads into financial services, especially in payments, and even more so than we probably had thought 5 years ago when we started the FIGI program. So while we think that fintech can support improved access to safe transaction accounts, we also need to encourage and that they are dedicated and kind of targeted towards the more vulnerable segments of the population. So we have to pay attention and that the development and adoption of new technologies doesn't leave certain segments of the population behind. So sometimes the more vulnerable segments and those that are not really having access to this payment services and transaction accounts. So, and I would go even a step further, that we should encourage the designs that are tailored towards the needs of these more vulnerable segments. And fintech really can be leveraged in this regard to improve the design of transaction accounts and payment services as such. And we'll have a dedicated session to that extent on the 27th of May, where we look into the kind of possibilities fintech offers when it comes to increased access to transaction accounts, especially from a payments perspective. So kind of point into that direction, and just to kind of re-emphasize what my colleagues have said before. To your question, and what is the role of standard setting bodies and central banks when it comes to financial inclusion? I think over the past years, the recognition has grown as to the impact of the global financial sector standard setting bodies and the impact they have on financial inclusion. And in fact, one could even argue that standard setting and financial inclusion can form a virtuous circle. Over the past years, we have seen financial inclusion objectives being recognized in a lot of guidance and standards that have been set by standard setting bodies. And this can further, obviously, financial inclusion, but also increased financial inclusion in turn can support the objectives of standard setting bodies when it comes to their mandates, such as increased safety, efficiency, and stability. So there are, of course, a number of sister standard setting bodies whose work is key for financial inclusion in view of their respective focus areas. And examples of these focus areas are obviously anti-money laundering and counter terrorist financing, deposit insurance, and banking supervision. But me, as being part of the CPMI, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures, we are the international standard setter when it comes to payments, and we are focused on the safety and efficiency of payment clearing and settlement. And for me, there is a natural link when it comes to financial inclusion. So financial inclusion, I typically say financial inclusion starts with payments. So a transaction account and efficient and accessible safe retail payment systems and services are really critical for greater financial inclusion, and typically those financial services all of us are using most often, and also those financial services we are typically, when we start to get integrated into financial services, are using first. So from that point of view, it can serve as a gateway to other financial services, but we also have to take a careful view that we are not, as mentioned before, excluding those that do not have access to these new forms of digital payments, for example. And for that reason, the CPMI, together with the World Bank, 5 years ago, published the guidance on payment aspects of financial inclusion, or PAFI, as we like to call it. And PAFI is based on 7 guiding principles, which really resemble the shape of a house. And these guiding principles are based on 3 foundational enablers: the legal and regulatory framework, public and private sector commitment, and also safe and efficient ICT and financial infrastructure. And based on these solid foundations, you can build the rest of the house, the pillars or the rooms that are looking into the access channels, the product design, financial capability we've heard before, also large volume use cases like government-to-person payments. And central banks specifically, of course, play a key role when it comes to the solid foundations of this PAFI house. As a catalyst, they can facilitate public and private sector commitment to have really a sustained and commitment when it comes to financial inclusion across all segments of the population. As an overseer, they can contribute to the conducive framework when it comes to foster innovation and competition in financial services more broadly and payments in specific, and while at the same time obviously addressing the risks. And finally, central banks, of course, typically operating the core payment systems within a country, with gross settlement systems when it comes to wholesale payments, but also increasingly faster payments or instant payment systems that are targeted towards the retail payment segment. So based on these solid foundations, I think that a resilient customer-focused financial sector can evolve, and that financial inclusion can be expanded in a sustainable way, and therefore also benefits the society at large.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Panelists, I've just had a thought. What are the solutions that you're currently finding hard to implement? Because we have over 300 people in our audience and they're all interested in this area. So there must be ways that they can help out. So if you have a specific problem that you're trying to solve, or you're nearly there, now is a fantastic opportunity to air that and see if there are people who may get in touch after the panel ends. So would anyone like to start with that idea?
I could throw in an initial
plug.
Oh, yes, please. A lot of things come to mind. And
Great.
So keeping me focused on just one or so is always a challenge. But the first thing that that immediately surfaces for me is gender disaggregated data. So I'm not sure if everyone has seen the State of the Industry report that GSMA recently put out, which shows the rapid and substantial increase in digital payments globally that's happened over the last year. And we had a conversation with them, and there was a question around, okay, well, how many of those new accounts that were open and how much of that new account usage was by women? And they said, well, we don't know because the regulators don't make us track that information. And we talked about this in the remarks, and Mahesh and others have mentioned it too, that also for targeting women for G2P payments as economic response was rolling out, we don't actually have really, we look at usually household level data. We don't always have gender disaggregated data. And also for consumer protection, grievance redressal mechanisms, making sure that we are designing all of those types of kind of foundational enabling environment policies right. Having the data to know how the different tools and policies impact women is just a huge gap. And so I think that it's hard for us to get better at those things if we don't actually have those data. And so for me, for better ecosystems, better social protection policies, for better consumer protection, for us to really track and advance this with the urgency that we're discussing today, we're going to need better data.
Yeah, LJ, I completely agree with Jamie. I also think that regulators need to continue, to the extent possible, in investing in supervisory and regulatory technologies, or what we colloquially call SupTech and RegTech. We did a study last year with the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance, and we found that almost half of financial sector authorities reported that COVID-19 had posed challenges for them to perform their core functions, particularly in a work from home environment. And about 40% of them reported challenges when coordinating with other agencies, right, that also play a key regulatory function when working from home. And so there is going to be a discussion during the symposium about SupTech, but I think it's really important that regulators stay on top of these developments in technology, both from the standpoint of their supervision duties, but also just from their own work from home capabilities. And that's an area that I think far too few regulators have really invested in over the last few years.
Yeah, regulation traditionally takes quite a long time to catch up with technology, and we see this in the autonomous driving sector. We see this in artificial intelligence and machine learning as well. So it's probably a call to arms for any regulators to understand the impact of technology on daily life and, of course, on all of us in the future. Thank you for that. I have another. Oh, go for it, Bilal. I just saw your hand move. And yes. Thomas, you can go after.
Thank you. If I could add that, the audience, how they can help is to help us scale FIGI. Scale on perhaps 3 dimensions. One is the regulatory guidance that has been developed to try to localize it, translate it at the country level. On the second, scaling is on the technology through all the reports and knowledge that is being shared through FIGI, to use that knowledge on a local basis, from security to payments to digital ID. And the third scaling is in terms of capacity building. Without financial literacy, we can put all kinds of gadgets and solutions, but the people, the citizens using it, need to have the literacy. And there is a massive amount of capacity building. So if the participants can help scale FIGI in their country, in those three dimensions, I think we will be having a much wider and global impact.
Thank you. Thomas, did you want to come in?
Yeah, two areas I think that are especially important in days like these was in view of the COVID, and those areas both start with C. One is cyber resilience, the other one is cross-border payments. I think these are two areas we really need to focus on. We have the cyber resilience guidance that was issued by the CPMI 2016. We have also now the additional taking this as a starting point. Also the outcome of the output of the FIGI work on cyber resilience, and in addition, we have wholesale endpoint security as additional topics to be looked at and to be really something that is to be taken seriously, especially in a working from home environment. The other area, and we have all seen the figures, for example, published by the World Bank last year, the potential decline of remittances, so the lifeline of people that are dependent on their loved ones working abroad. And obviously, those are very often working in the service sector, which have been particularly affected by the lockdown measures. So here, cross-border payments are ever more important than they have been before, especially in the remittance segment. We think we have to improve cross-border payments. There is a G20 roadmap that looks at cross-border payment comprehensively from the wholesale to the retail side, including remittances. And here we need both public and private sector commitment to implement that roadmap and really make sure that, for example, remittances keep flowing. And also some of the governmental person payments that have been paid out in countries we have seen, for example, from the US to Mexico, have really kind of translated into remittance flows and kind of helping the loved ones back home in these difficult times.
Brilliant, thank you. So how can we improve the number of financially literate people? What's getting in the way of people becoming financially literate? And I guess what I'm asking here is the surprising use cases as opposed to the sort of obvious ones.
Maybe I'll start quickly in terms of, people are used to transacting in cash. And it takes a paradigm shift to move from transacting in cash to transacting with your mobile phone. You trust the cash that you have in hand, you know where to store it, you know how to count it, etc. When you ask someone who has never used a mobile phone to, one, use the mobile phone, connect, and then send and receive money over the mobile phone, that digital transformation needs to be accompanied by showing the person how to do it. How do you use your basic phone? It's not a smartphone, it's just a basic phone where you have to do a few touches on the mobile to send the money. You use a hashtag at the end of the USSD command. You need to then make sure that people trust that the money that they're sending or receiving has reached the destination. So to do that transformation from cash to digital requires a bit of hand-holding and training and capacity building. And I could see that perhaps associations and civil society could play a key role hand in hand with government to provide that training locally to men and women who have never used a mobile phone that need to use it for payments and transaction accounts. So that's one example of the capacity building and the literacy that is very basic in that digital transformation.
I think it's fascinating that there's such a level of persuasion and trust in technology, and we see this with not just in the financial sector, but we see this with all aspects of technology. So I personally find it very interesting that right down to this granular level of giving somebody the opportunity, it's not enough. You have to be able to explain the benefits of why, and on top of that, achieve a level of trust as well. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to kind of try and amalgamate the questions that we've received. Some are questions about FIGI reaching out to young people, and other questions are about any new programs like FIGI in the near future that's going to continue on with the work. So if there's anyone that quite likes the idea of answering these. Bilal, I can see your little hand go up. Great.
Yes, thanks. On the young people engagement at the FIGI Symposium in Egypt, we actually had a hackathon, and we had hundreds of youth in Egypt that participated in developing all kinds of applications for financial services and financial inclusion. That was in a physical meeting in Egypt, so the reach was sort of localized, but certainly we communicated about it. We could envision having more hackathons or more engagements of young programmers around the world, especially when you need localization of the language, localization of the regulatory environment to the currency and so on. So the youth are the driving force towards implementing many of these digital services, digital financial services. So they have a huge role to play. Also in terms of the literacy that I was mentioning earlier, the youth can teach the older generations who are not perhaps digitally savvy and show them how to use their mobile phone. And we have actually seen that during COVID-19, when social subsidies were being sent by the government towards the people that need it. Many of the older folks that don't know how to do it have been helped by the youth, and I've seen associations around the world do that. So yes, the youth have a great role to play. I hope that you can be guided by the many publications we have on the FIGI website, and we're certainly here to accompany you going forward to implement many of these ideas.
Brilliant, thank you.
Up there, LJ, I think some of the work we've done around acceptance in FIGI is so important, because I think, for youth, living in that digital ecosystem is really critical, and making sure that digital payments that you might receive, whether it's part of a social program or from a government, can be used in your everyday life, I think it's really an important part of making sure that we don't just stop at the edge of the water with the creation of an account, but we actually build an ecosystem that is very useful to people. And I want to pick up a little bit, if I could, on the financial education question, because I think this is one of those really thorny, technocratic issues where the evidence is really mixed about what works, and we don't have all the answers, right? And I think governments need to continue to play an important role in mitigating some of the obvious fraud cases that we've, Jamie and others have mentioned, that have been on the rise during COVID. But they also need to continue to reach out to consumers, test different methods, whether it's using celebrity endorsements or education tools, other things like that create these kind of teachable moments, if you will, about financial literacy and financial education, and just continue to do what will work in those very localized environments. This is one of those issues that I think is so jurisdiction specific and culture specific that authorities are really best placed to make advances here.
It's almost like you have to choose between putting a mobile in somebody's hand and getting them familiar with that technology first, and then transition on to using it to make transactions. And I guess depending on the cultural area, you have to choose different ways of doing it. I'm sure machine learning should be able to help with this. If only we could clean the data up and give it the correct data set so it comes out with something useful. Well, I'm going to ask a closing question now to all of you, and I'm going to start with you, Bilal. What do you hope to see as a major outcome of the FIGI Symposium?
Yes, thank you, LJ. Well, I think the FIGI Symposium is really a unique platform that brings telecom and financial services sectors experts, and especially the creation of new ideas and new possibilities in that intersection of finance and telecom that is quite exciting. So FIGI is privileged to also enjoy the pioneering experience of developing countries that brought financial inclusion through mobile phones, such as M-Pesa in Kenya, for example, to just name one of the pioneers. The FIGI Symposium will showcase national experiences in promoting financial inclusion. It will also share the latest findings of the FIGI working groups. So we hope to make sure that that knowledge is transferred through the symposium. It's also, the symposium has an excellent program spanning topics of fintech for inclusion to consumer protection, gender equity, the experiences reached to reach the underserved and vulnerable populations during the pandemic, in addition to the topics of the 3 working groups that we mentioned. So we hope to hear as well from the audience their questions, their perspectives on financial inclusion, and their views for the future ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thomas, let's come to you next. What do you hope to see as a major outcome of the FIGI Symposium?
I think some of the aspects we already raised in this panel discussion. I think we're going to advance the discussion on this front when it comes to inclusion, financial inclusion of women, when it comes to financial inclusion of the more vulnerable segments of the population, including the elderly, for example. So from this point of view, I think there are aspects we can further discuss and elaborate on. Of course, fintech will be one of the major themes during this event. And the question there is, how can we ensure that nobody is left behind? So I think what I would refer to as financial innovation or fintech for financial inclusion, I think we should kind of address it from both angles, the risk it brings as well as the potential. I hope that with this FIGI Symposium, we will not stop working in kind of getting hopefully everyone globally at some point financially included. And even though if FIGI comes to a closure, I think there are a lot of things to do. And kind of referring back to the house I mentioned before, it takes many hands to build a house. So when doing so, I think we should make sure that the house itself is a smart one by using fintech technologies, but also an inclusive home by leveraging these developments. And I hope the kind of, although it's the kind of closing symposium, it kind of gives new momentum to continue the good work and to implement a lot of these guidance and a lot of these inputs that has been produced by the FIGI group.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Jamie, you're next. What do you hope to see as a major outcome of the FIGI Symposium?
Thanks, LJ. Well, so the purpose of the symposia over these 4 years has really been largely about bringing together all of various sectors and communities to come together and talk about the new ideas and the tools and to share and to connect. And so I am seeing so many amazing questions and commentary already in the chat. I wish we were able to be in a room together and be discussing and answering these questions together and rolling up our sleeves together. And so I really hope that this, even in this virtual format, is a forum for a lot of connection and sharing of ideas and that energy over time, and that continues. I think what we've heard and been said pretty loud and clear is that we're in a pretty urgent moment, and this is an all hands on deck, and this is a place for all hands to be, for this is the deck, and we're trying to bring the hands together. And so connecting everybody here, engaging at this great level with this kind of energy in all of the other sessions, bringing these new ideas and you know, on the question of women and vulnerable groups, really having that alarm bell that Mahesh mentioned in the back of your head as we're talking through not just the sessions that are focused on the vulnerable and not just the sessions that are focused on women, but all of the sessions throughout the symposium, asking ourselves, what would it take to make this work for everyone? And just continuing discussion from there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Mahesh, over to you. What do you hope to see as a major outcome of the FIGI Symposium?
Thanks, LJ. Well, I think with the risk of being repetitive, the first, second, and third priorities are all women. I think we've heard that a lot. I think we're at an inflection point, frankly, precipitated by the COVID crisis, where we run the risk of really, I think, you know, not addressing this fundamental challenge in a way that could be really harmful or has been really harmful already. And it's going to require a multi-pronged approach, like we've talked about, whether it's gender disaggregated data, whether it's looking at, you know, who runs fintechs themselves and who gets that kind of funding. But beyond that, I would like to see a renewed commitment to really focusing on the DFS enablers, the key things that we know that work, you know, whether it's the financial infrastructure or the, you know, as we like to say, the plumbing of the financial system, digital ID, managing, you know, cyber resilience and the cybersecurity threat. I mean, these are things we know need to be worked on. These are things that potentially run the risk of being forgotten as countries begin to hopefully emerge from this this health pandemic and the ensuing kind of financial pandemic. So I'd like to see renewed commitment to those basic enablers.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Is there anything anyone would like to add before I start to close the panel? We do have a minute or so for anyone to add any final thoughts, things that I've forgotten to ask, things that you would like to say as part of our opening. Now's your chance. Okay,
only that I wish you would send us off with a little tune.
Yes.
Later on, there'll be, I'm sure I will start to play the piano at some point during our conference. We've got 6 weeks of this to enjoy. So yes, I might be tempted to play a little during the event. Well, thank you all so much, panelists. We're coming to the end of the panel. And of course, we've just got started. And I did see a question in the chat earlier about joining the working group. And you can email figi-symposium@itu.int for follow-up, which I think is already a good start. And thank you so much to our audience who've been joining us throughout our time. And yes, I think we've come to the end of this panel. But of course, we've just got started and there's so much more to come. So panelists, thank you for sharing your thoughts and helping to prepare us for the rest of the symposium. We're really grateful for you to take part. And also, audience, we're displaying a short satisfaction poll, which we'd be grateful for you to take part in. How likely are you to recommend the FIGI Symposium to a friend or colleague? I like the smiley face next to the 10 as well. That's very lovely, isn't it? And of course, this session is recorded if you would like to watch any of the sections again, or indeed all of it. And that's going to be available later on the FIGI website as well. Audience, we hope this is a suitable appetizer for the next 6 weeks, where you're invited to take part in a wide range of online events covering everything from cybersecurity and trust right through to fintech for inclusion, gender equity, digital identity and more, just so much. And so it just remains for me to close this very, very lovely 2021 FIGI Symposium Opening Ceremony. Thank you, speakers, audience, organisers and technical people for participating. And I would also like to end this by inviting you to our interactive session starting in just over half an hour, which is all about the impact of COVID-19 on digital financial services. Thank you very much.